Today's episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an investment firm with over 20 years' experience, now expanding its offering to a wider pool of investors.
Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund, ELTIF, that provides access to real estate investment through a regulated and professionally managed fund. Open is designed for long-term stability, and unlike many investment vehicles typically restricted to professional investors, they are available to a wide range of investors with lower minimum investment requirements, making them more accessible than ever. To learn more, visit greenmanopen.com.
Before making any investments, it's important to understand the risks. Investments can go up or down, and past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated ELTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Hello and welcome to this, our latest edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
We're going to go slightly off-piste today, I suppose. We're going to move away for the first half of this podcast from domestic politics, and we're not going stateside to Trump. Instead, we're going to the Vatican, and we're going to talk about who I'm only half-jokingly calling the woke Pope, because it has been fascinating over the past few days since the death of Pope Francis to read about the political power struggles that went on in the Vatican under his papacy, how he totally alienated, well, I wouldn't say maybe but he did alienate a lot of conservatives who felt that he was taking the church in far too progressive a way. And then on the other hand, an awful lot of the progressives felt he wasn't going far enough. And in that, he had to manage all sorts of geographic issues as well. Declining numbers of Catholics in Europe who wanted a far more liberal approach to how things were done. But then he didn't agree with things like in Germany, where they wanted to do blessings of gay couples. He got a backlash in particular from the likes of American hardline cardinals who didn't want any of that to be done. And then when it came to things like women in the church as well as LGBT issues, in trying to help get the numbers of the ministry increased in Latin America by allowing women to be giving the sacraments, there was a backlash in that as well from the American priests. And actually, I should have said, I think the bigger backlash, Ivan, against the LGBT came from Africa, very, very much, where they were saying under no circumstances will there be any blessings of homosexuals, and homosexuality is still regarded by African Catholics as an enormous sin. As a Protestant watching all of this, what do you make of all of the power struggles in the Catholic Church for supremacy?
Well, first of all, I do want to give some insights as a Protestant, as a member of the Church of Ireland, and looking at the changes that have taken place since I sort of became involved in public affairs 1978, which is when John Paul II took over, right to the modern day. I would say the biggest transformation in Irish society has been the church-state relationship and the public's adherence to Catholicism. And I'd like to just chew the fat on that. But just look, the 88-year-old man died. We expected he'd die a couple of months ago when he had double pneumonia. I think to his credit, first of all, to give on the plus side, his humility and modesty of lifestyle, beyond doubt, one of the last things he did to visit prisoners, what he did to support migrants, ringing Gazans, Christians every night. Like, he lived the gospel in a very particular and likeable way, and all the trappings of a monarchy or something he deliberately forsook. And I think from that point of view, you couldn't but warm to him. But I think his 12-year-old papacy did not succeed in defining the future of the church. What he was actually great at was the master of a soundbite, like, who am I to judge gays, or who am I to judge? And he had one-liners, but actually I think, and this is the real political element of this, when you see the array on both sides of progressives and conservatives, there is no doubt that the prospect of a split in the Catholic Church, 1.4 billion people, cannot be ruled out, because if the next Pope goes in one direction or another, I think it will reach a breaking point.
And before we come back to Ireland, it's been fascinating, much of the material available to read over the week on this. And what I hadn't realised as well was the actions he took after Pope Benedict died. Of course, we had this extraordinary situation whereby Benedict resigned but continued to live in the Vatican. He continued to live in the papal apartments while Francis took the guest house because it had been more modest. But it was only after Benedict died in 2022 that I think Francis felt empowered to get rid of some of the people that he felt were blocking his initiatives. And there's one name that jumps out at me, which I think is a fascinating story. And I don't know, you've seen Conclave, the Robert Harris.
Yes, yeah, a really good movie.
The adaptation.
We'll strongly recommend it.
Yeah, adaptation of the Robert Harris book turned into a movie, terrific movie. And there's an American conservative cardinal in it, played by John Lithgow. And I wonder, is he actually based on a fella called Ray Burke? What a name. I mean, a name for Irish politics when we all think of all of the trouble involving Ray Burke and the planning tribunals and Ray Burke going to prison for tax evasion and all of that sort of stuff. But anyway, this guy, Ray Burke, as it happens, he is Irish-American.
He's very conservative.
Utterly conservative. And he was actually fired by Pope Francis in November 23, as in sense not fired as a cardinal, but he had his accommodation in the Vatican removed and he had his salary taken away from him. And it was he and a few others that Francis only felt able to move against after Benedict had died. And Burke had come up very strongly against the LGBTQ community. As it happens, he apparently is... His grandparents are all Irish. On his father's side from Tipperary, on his mother's side from Cork, from Cullen, which is in North Cork on the border with Kerry, and he's relations all over Mill Street apparently as well. And he has been back there and said mass there about 15 years ago and stuff like that. But apparently he's one of the figures. And what's really going to be interesting in seeing how the conclave goes this time is whether, and this is pure politics. This is where it goes beyond religion and goes into pure politics. Has Francis managed to stack the curia with enough people to continue with his desires to change the Catholic Church, in that the various younger cardinals that he's appointed are from Asia, China, although it was a very strange deal done with China, where the Chinese authorities have the power of effectively nominating the bishops and the Pope can veto them or not, and the Chinese don't always adhere to it. But anyway, has Francis managed to stack the deck so that he will have it, or will the Conservatives come back? And this is, again, the bizarre thing, that there actually is, essentially, within the Catholic Church, a MAGA movement. And this is, J.D. Vance was, I think this was probably, well, you have to be careful how you say this, but there is, it's
You're
almost...
not going to impute that JD pushed him over the edge.
No.
That's what I'm expecting here.
No. All I'm going to say isn't that...
One visit, one chat with him and he dies the next day. Is that
But he died within hours, and you sort of wonder, that's hardly fair to Pope Francis.
Hardly fair to J.D. Vance
The last
either.
major world figure that he ends up meeting is US Vice President J.D. Vance, a recent convert to Catholicism. He only converted in 2019. I mean, you wonder about that as well. He converted to Trumpism around the same time as well. But that there is this belief amongst some hardline conservative Catholics, particularly in the United States of America, that they need a strong leader, Trump-like, to go back to old values. And that could further split the Catholic Church in the way that you said, and also raises issues. One of the other things as well is that, as well as supporting immigrants, and he had very much rebuked Vance on a number of occasions for his lack of Christianity or Catholicism in his approach towards immigrants. But climate change was another thing. He had an encyclical back in 2015. He actually believed that it was something that the Catholic Church had to engage with, that one of the causes of poverty and one of the causes of divisions was the man-made climate change. And that's something else that some people want a non-woke Pope to row back on. So it's going to be very, very interesting as to what happens internationally. But bring us back to Ireland. And I
will come back to Ireland. Yeah. Just to say on his record, I think there is a blemish on his record when it comes to clerical sex abuse, which has been the biggest I think, reason why the popularity and the attendance levels of Mass has dropped. And the particular, and I was frontline with that, with the Ferns inquiry and Bishop Comiskey and all of that, which I'll come to. But I do think he does stand accused throughout his priestly career, both in Argentina and in relation to two individuals which he provided refuge for in the Vatican City, with his sort of full protection, people that had been accused of horrendous things. And just on J.D. Vance versus the Pope, there was actually a very kind of deep philosophical difference, because J.D. Vance's whole approach is your primary loyalty is to your family and then to your community and moving out in sort of concentric circles. And that's why you would be pro-nationalist and all of that kind of thing. Whereas the Pope kind of pick the poorest, weakest migrant, the poorest sufferer in prison, and say the Christian message and Jesus's message was to relate to them, which was the polar opposite. But where I think the Pope papered over the cracks that will not be possible to continue unless, and I do have a particular candidate I think is going to win, but like on the issues of climate change, on the issues of migration, on the issues of LGBTQ and abortion and women in the church. You know, when I look at it and I look at the contrast to the Protestant churches, they have faced the very same challenges over the last 50 years. And the truth of it is, the doctrine that's there for 2,000 years from Scripture and from the Vatican, he really, although he was the first pope outside of Europe since the 8th century, he didn't really change anything. Like, he had some softer words, but women deacons, no. Change in celibacy, being priest, no. You know, on all those things, you know, like there's a blessing, but there's no such thing as marriage equality. So I would say that actually he was almost like a wolf in sheep's clothing, insofar as that he gave the illusion of reform, but actually when it came to it, he didn't give any actual lasting reform. Now, maybe this will cause a schism in the church, but if someone did attempt to do it. But I see this as the fundamental problem that in Ireland and across Europe, and even to a lesser extent in other democracies, but particularly in countries like Germany, there is an a la carte approach to say, I'd like to believe in the afterlife, I like to believe in Christian ways of living, but actually I part courses with some of the rules you have about the way females are treated, celibacy, LGBT, and so on. And the truth of it is that this is either doctrine or it's almost modernization. And the church has a choice here, because in the case of, take my local rector at home, Nicola Halford is a wonderful young woman. She has 2 daughters. She's there 5 or 6 years. The energy she brings to things, the compassion, I just think women priests are a big improvement. You know, and look, you can't generalise. People have different personalities. Secondly, obviously, the church couldn't function in terms of no vocations without having married people. In fact, quite a few clergy now in the Church of Ireland are former Catholic priests who got married. So what I would say is, if you want to modernise, if you want to get with the programme and maintain numbers, you've got to relax some of these rules to a more secular approach.
Yeah, a couple of things out of that. I think actually some very prominent women have been very disappointed. Mary McAleese, the former president, be one of those who is a very sincerely committed Catholic, and I think she was disappointed by the failure of the Pope to bring through the changes, in particularly in relation to women, let alone LGBTQ people as well. And there was a suggestion at times that maybe it was a little bit of the South American tradition that he came from, a bit macho almost, and started seeing, you know, different roles between men and women, which is part of the culture wars as well, that the MAGA lot do start pushing a lot as well. But what struck me about it is, you know, it's very difficult to bring about change without breaking everything. I mean, this is... I mean, okay, you can take the sort of the Trump approach and just sort of break everything and just see what comes back together. But can you really do that with a 2,000-year-old institution like the Catholic Church? Maybe he did actually have to progress slowly. And as I said, put the people in place so that then the next wave coming along will get more change actually made. Or could it be that the church will go back more traditional, will abandon attempts to try and appeal to the more liberal Europe, because that the power base is moving from Europe to the new countries of Africa and Asia?
What's the difference between a female deacon or a nun?
I think isn't it all to do in relation to sacraments?
The communion,
in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. Okay.
Although women give communion as ministers of the
do.
Eucharist in Catholic churches and stuff, but they don't do the bit of the sacrificial offering and the rest of it. So
the Jesus' body and blood and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But the point is this, that the vocations crisis will reach a point that you're just not going to have enough young guys who are going to give up their opportunity of sexual freedom, opportunity of having a family, rearing their own kids, even though they fully believe in the principles of the Roman Catholic Church. So I actually think they are man-made rules, and that, you know what, it's good for the church to do it. Now, in relation to where we might go, so my default position.
Yeah, sorry, hold on here. You've picked out the next pope?
Why? My default position. There are two clear favourites.
Yeah.
Okay, one of which I would discount because you'll be aware in the Conclave film, the cardinal that actually hosted and chaired the discussion, who in this case is Pietro Parolin. Right, he's 69. He's an Italian guy. He's kind of the Secretary of State. So, put it like this, the thinking is he is actually the favourite. He's 2-1 favourite, 7-4 favourite, because he is the most senior cleric in the entire church. However, if you watch Conclave, you'll see that person is so busy trying to keep it behind the gaps between the ditches.
They can't go and lobby for themselves.
Exactly. That they're actually too close to the process. So the rules are you have to be under 80 and you have to be a cardinal. So the one I think has a right chance, based on your 80% appointment of people, the name to watch out for is Luis Antonio Tagle. I don't know if it's pronounced Tagle. He's the Filipino. He's 63. He looks the part. And I think he could maybe straddle some of the ambiguities that we've spoken about in relation to fundamental doctrine versus modernization. So what do you think of him?
So you actually have checked out the odds and all?
Oh, yeah, and there's three then second favourites, both around all around 7-1. Zuppi, Z-U-P-P-I, Turkson and Pizzaball.
Just as a completely sidebar
the bookies have to put their money where their mouth is.
Well, you may remember...
And apparently the Holy Spirit decides. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that used to be...
I think whoever counts as the best wins.
I remember growing up and listening to the radio coverage for things like the elections in 78, when there were two elections because the first Pope John Paul died so suddenly, 33 days or what was it after he was elected. And of course, the whole thing, the coverage was like, the cardinals go in to pray and then the Holy Spirit descends and they make the decision. Whereas quite
Why
clearly,
are you smiling?
Because
You're not buying that.
Quite clearly, it's all about the machinations.
You think it's more like a Fianna Fáil parliamentary party meeting?
Like any parliamentary party meeting, I suppose it is. But funny fact, in 2013, you may remember this, a complete sidebar on this, but Paddy Power got a stunt. They got a Pope mobile that they brought into Vatican Square with the basketball player Dennis Rodman going around.
But that's the guy you went to North Vietnam with, North Korea.
This is what I'm getting to, Ivan.
Yes, okay.
Just wait, this is what I'm getting to. So he went around, and the Paddy Power stunt, which of course caused the usual outrage, but got them global coverage, was money back if the Pope is black. So basically,
but they knew there was going to be no black pope.
Well, no, they said there was a possibility of it, and they were offering the odds and everyone. And they knew not that many people would bet on people, but they got loads of publicity, and they added to the publicity by having Rodman. And then it was Rodman got into conversations with a Paddy Power executive called Rory Scott, and it sort of went from there. And and then within 5 months later, 5 or 6 months later, I was with Rodman in North Korea. So that's sort of like...
Yes, okay. Which look, the moral of that story, speaking about morality, is Matt will take a free junket anywhere in the world.
There was nothing free about it, but anyway.
Okay, so just some of my reflections over the last 40 years, particularly as one of the few Protestant TDs in the Dáil. The only time I felt really uncomfortable as a proddy in a rural constituency was in 1983. I would say generally I had a rule of thumb, I need to get 8,000 votes. The max Protestant votes were about 1,500, 2,000. They were a dying breed. But I got as many as there was to be got out of it. But I always said I needed 4 times more Catholic votes than Protestant votes. So I was never trading. You know the way in the North people are really more denominational than they are Christian. So one of the things that happened to me when I first went onto it was, they said, this is fantastic. fantastic. We have a young new TD. And they put me on the Synod, which is like the national executive of the Church of Ireland. They used to meet every second month in Rathmines. Well, within a year, I just said, I'm getting the hell off of this. The people from the north really pissed me off, insofar as you'd meet people who are very spiritual and nice people and genuinely really committed to a good life. These Nordies, to be honest with you, I suppose it's the root of my antipathy to Nordies, leaving aside the whole Sinn Féin IRA thing, is that they actually, the whole Sabbath thing, like betting shops weren't allowed open on us. The whole thing was ramming down the throat of the Catholics in a Rangers Celtic style. And I actually found it totally objectionable. And there was a complete different culture between those on the Synod, North and South. And that's my first thing to say. But in 1983, this kind of Spuck campaign, and some of the clergy got really heavily involved in this. And like it just was unpleasant, it was bitter. And I never thought I would see the day that in May 2018 that was reversed. In other words, the remote concept of abortion being legalised in Ireland was so alien to 75% of the population in 1983. Who could have predicted? That is a real intergenerational change that took place.
Okay, but a couple of things in that. What was the Church of Ireland's position in relation to the abortion referendum in 1983?
There was divided views, but generally speaking, they weren't in favour of putting it in the Constitution. They're quite strict. And one of the other big changes in my lifetime, just take it with my generation versus my adult kids, was a thing called mixed marriages. Yeah. There was a thing that actually, like my father would have had very strict views. Don't think you're inheriting one penny if you marry a Catholic, right? Whereas, like with my own kids, if they have any semblance of interest in not having beyond a registry office to go to any church to baptise under any faith would be a result. And so therefore where it's moved is, instead of a denominational approach, now you have a situation, it's either Christian or non-Christian, which is much better.
Yeah. And then did you find during your career in politics, were you clearly identified as being a Protestant by people and then targeted for it?
I would say more it was in the context of being a West Brit, that if you're a Protestant, you're automatically a West Brit. And the Republican element would be very quick to, well, we don't need another West Brit in it all, that kind of... But no, to be honest...
Its own form of sectarianism, but dressed up differently.
Well, put it like this. No, but what I would say is the vast majority of people, and certainly this became completely redundant by the end of my political career around the millennium. My last election was 97, 2002. So the fact of the matter is that all of that was expunged from... but sure, look at it. Back in those days, the rivalry between FG and FF was the main thing. Charlie and Garrett. Now they're all the one. So, like, really all of these changes vis-a-vis religion. And the other thing is this. Numerically, you take the demographics. When I was elected to the Dáil in 1981, 5-6% of the population were on a census declared as Protestant, right? Today, I'd say it's about 2%, but they've actually, with these changes of women priests, they've kind of held on to their core thing. They've closed rural churches, they've rationalised, and so on. But, the real change is... Like, I used to collect an awful lot of money outside Churchgate collections, me to get to the money quickly. And so the point is that, like, now, and you'd actually see it, like, there are people, and some might only stay at the back of the church in those days just to be seen or to bless themselves and go again. But the truth of it is, you take it, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock Mass, they'd all be full in St. Aidan's Cathedral. So that has all changed. And the kind of disassociation of people from going to church is being revolutionary.
Okay, I'm sorry, we need to take a break. And I do want to talk to you about Bishop Comiskey, because that was one of the big scandals.
That was a real controversy.
In the 1990s, at a time when you were a government minister. But yeah, we'll get to that, and I have a couple of other things to ask you about. And then I also want to talk to you about the teacher conferences this week and the demands of government, and also the ideas that government have in relation to downsizing housing for old age pensioners.
Someone texted me on Sunday, what What WTF is Matt on about now? He's wanting to get the owl ones out of their houses. I said, don't blame me. I don't even know what you're talking about. So apparently you were on News Talk saying that you were going to shepherd all these old people out of their rattling around in big old houses. You're going to it's one step up from a German approach to these things.
It's somewhat of a misrepresentation, but we'll clarify that when we come back in the second half of this week's Path to Power.
This episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm. Greenman Open focuses on investing in grocery-anchored retail real estate, designed to generate stable, long-term income. The fund is managed in Ireland.
Learn more at greenmanopen.com. Before making any investment, it's important to understand the risks. Investments can go up or down. A past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated ELTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Welcome back to Path to Power. Just before you tell me, Ivan, about Bishop Comiskey, so when you were a TD, did you end up having to go to lots of Catholic religious services, such as funerals and things?
Oh, absolutely. On average, I go to 7 funerals a week. And you get into more trouble for not going to a funeral than anything else. No, on a personal level, I had 2 priests that were very Father Aidan Jones and Father Walter Ford. And they used to say about Aidan Jones that there was a vacancy in the Church of Ireland for the Dean of Ferns. They said, Father Aidan Jones is a cert to get that. He was so pro-ecumenical, okay? But Walter Ford was really, really fantastic.
Wait, sorry, when you say Father, these are both in the Church of Ireland?
No,
They're
Catholic.
Roman Catholic.
And they were personal friends of mine, and we used to go to dinner in each other's houses. This is back in the early 80s. And Walter Ford was kind of the press secretary. He'd been involved in the Fernsdoston Youth Service, the National Youth Service. He was kind of a well-known priest, and he was kind of running the show in Gorey. But he was the PR man for the press officer for Comiskey. And I got very friendly with Comiskey, and Comiskey was in my house many times. And so basically, I actually got insights into the loneliness of the priesthood. How they can't be kind of open about their feelings. And put it like this, there was a fair bit of drink involved, right? You know what I mean? And so on. But I actually liked like one of the best jokes that Comiskey told me, right? Which is so he would go off to Thailand for a holiday, right? And so he would be in this hotel, and maybe he'd be in this or by the pool area at night. And he actually told me the story, and he said, you'll probably edit it out, but anyway, that they came to him because they'd be very attentive with their face towels and all that every second, and say, Your Excellency, maybe you like some female company tonight? And he said, no, thank you, I have my Bible or whatever, another gin and tonic or whatever. So then they come to him the next night and say, perhaps you'd like some young boy, male accompaniment? He said, no, thank you. So the point is this, that he had a great sense of humour, and he was self-deprecating.
So this is an episode of The White Lotus, is it?
Exactly. So Deirdre loves The White Lotus. I don't get it at all. I find it the most boring programme on earth. And so basically, what I'm saying to you is this, I actually had a fondness for them. So when the whole thing erupted, and there was never...
So you better explain to people what the whole thing was.
Well, put it like this. What really happened was that there was a seminary in St. Peter's, and there were people who were abused there over the generations who became abusers, right? So Father Sean Fortune was a man I actually reviled and hated. He was deeply manipulative, and he was originally in Feathered on Sea down in the south of the county, and as a curate caused no end of problems that Avril and I got dragged in. And then he moved into my home area of Ballymurn. And the fact of the matter is that he actually sort of committed suicide in the end, and the whole thing was... So there was a number of these priests, and what happened for Comiskey, and what always happens is, there was no allegation that Comiskey did anything improper himself or any of his closest people. The issue was they were accused of covering up, moving around these priests, and they didn't do enough. And you can imagine the victims and the families of the victims were really incensed, blamed the church and so on. So this led to the Ferns inquiry, which became a huge issue. So I was in Brussels as minister, and my PR people come to me saying Tommy O'Gorman wants to do an interview for the 9 o'clock news. Now, at this stage, I was pretty rabid about publicity. He said, we have a page 6 story on sheep, he said, but we have a page 1 story if you say something on Comiskey. So needless to say, a bit like the Larry Goodman, I wouldn't shed any, got my conclave of PR people and said, what can we say? And so say something but say nothing, but show a little bit of empathy, right? And I'll never forget it. So I said, we led the 9 o'clock news. Government minister says, I don't believe in kicking a person when they're down, which was to show a little bit of empathy for things, which was completely against the media zeitgeist, which was, you know, he should really be kicked out of his job. He should be sacked and a real a virulently anti-Comiskey position. And I remember the most senior journalist in Wexford rang me and said, you know, you've just lost your seat in Wexford.
Sure was.
Well, someone like that. So anyway, the point is this. So I actually, my reaction to all those things, my reaction to all those things, and obviously the media were involved in revealing some of the things, so they weren't kind of neutral players. And it was totally divisive. This was in the mid-1990s. And subsequently, Comiskey did have to step down and he left Ferns and all of that, very, very difficult time. And to this day, there might still be some scars around this. So I just said to myself, I said, when I got back, because when you're in Brussels, you're out of the bubble. You don't know, like, if you say something. So I got back and one of my special advisors said to me, who wasn't part of the conclave of what to say, don't kick a man when he's down, and I kind of felt that Tommy Gorman was a little bit sympathetic to Comiskey as well. So he wanted that line. So, my guy at home said he'd be a real IFA guy and he'd have his feet on the Tuam Mart and, Bandon Mart, what people are saying. And they said, this hasn't gone down well at all. You, of all people, a Church of Ireland person to defend Comiskey when no one is defending Comiskey. So the fact of the matter is, I just said to myself, I'll actually write out this storm. I won't say anything more, but I was actually confident that it would stand to me. Do you know what I mean?
Really? Why were you confident it would stand to you?
Because, there's times when, if you're showing, people, good Catholics would say, there wasn't one person to stand up and to defend in any way Bishop Comiskey. And it took a feckin' Church of Ireland guy to do it. When you're swimming against the tide, remember that you only need 20% of the vote to get elected. I reckon it was smart politics.
Did he ever thank you for it?
No, look, he didn't. In fact, we lost touch completely. And I don't know, he was originally, his family from Monaghan. I went up to one of his parents' funerals back in the day, well before that. He was an auxiliary bishop in Dublin and was seen as part of the liberal part of the church at that time. But he was socially just great crack and fun.
Just actually wondering, when the Pope John Paul I came in 1979 and the whole country went mad.
Yeah.
Did you attend any of the
No.
Or how did the Church of Ireland community react to this thing going on?
No, sorry. First of all, it was a great honour for Ireland. But no, sorry, for me, the lesson of that, take the Phoenix Park over and Eamon Casey and Galway and, the youth mass and all that. Absolutely hundreds of thousands of people. But the difference between, what year was it that Pope Francis came?
2018.
120,000 as against 600,000. It actually benchmarked for me how you kind of lost the audience a little bit here.
Okay, let's move on to other things. And although I wonder, I see Micheál Martin, Simon Harris and Michael D. Higgins are all at the funeral. We're recording on Friday morning. Many people might be hearing this on the day of the funeral.
They do a great show, don't they? For these, it's almost like the coronation of the king or the queen. But the spectacle they put on with all their uniformed people and the smoke and all the pyrotechnics, and the singing and chanting, and it goes on for hours.
I don't think they're actually setting off any pyrotechnics.
No. But the point is this:
there might be a little bit of incense from the chalice, but
you don't have to have any sense of anything other, and even the white smoke and the black smoke. It is a sense of history.
Theatre.
Yeah, absolute theatre. That's exactly the right word. It's brilliant theatre.
Which again, he was a little bit. But I'm just wondering, and I should have checked this before coming on. Do Micheál Martin, Simon Harris, and Mike D. Higgins all share the government jet?
That would be normal enough. He's gone out on the day early, though. Michael D's gone out a day early. But no, there is a hierarchy pecking order for the jet, and the president will be pretty high up.
But they all be allowed to be on it, in case the jet would go down, that you couldn't have all of the main people on the same flight.
Oh, well, that's unthinkable it would go down. But put it like this. If there's a thing whether one minister or Taoiseach or Foreign Affairs wants to get the jet, if the Taoiseach wants the jet gets the jet. Right. That's the way it works.
Well, at least I suppose the funeral on Saturday as well means that Micheál Martin can get back in time for the Cork Tipperary game in the park on Sunday. Priorities. Okay, let's talk about the teacher conferences, because I thought it was very interesting this week that and this follows on a recent survey done by Dublin City University talking about teacher burnout. Mm-hmm. And that an enormous number of teachers are talking about wanting to give up their job, that they find it actually too difficult now. The demand's been placed upon them. And nearly half would say that if they could, they would get out and they would do something else. This at a time when we have major vacancies all over the country, but particularly in urban areas, a failure to find enough teachers to fill positions. Also, a lot of teachers who are teaching subjects for which they're not actually qualified. It seems to be something of a mess. The government has decided that it will allow permanent posts to be given 1 year after a qualification, which seems entirely logical. Also talking about recognising this is a big issue, that a lot of the teachers who go and work abroad don't have their time working as a teacher abroad recognised for getting positions for pay grades when they come home. But there's a sort of a double-edged sword on this, because if you do say we will recognise it, isn't that an incentive for people to go away for a few years first to earn bigger money in Dubai or Australia if they know that when they come back it's all to their credit? So it incentivises people to go away at a time when we have a shortage. How does this mess get sorted out, and how much sympathy should we have for the teachers? And I know that you have family members, of course, in the teaching profession. So
the issues always Easter week is synonymous with teachers' conferences, INTO, ASTI, TUI, and so teacher shortages, number one issue. The three things you said, not only giving increments, as they do for primary school teachers, to post-primary teachers for service done abroad, the 1 year contract, after 1 year you can get a permanent contract, and actually recognising foreign qualifications are all actually good things to do. It's the same as you do for the construction industry if you have a shortage of electricians or planners or whatever. So that's all fairly straightforward. Some of the other issues, reform of the Leaving Cert, a little bit, the oral exams, a little bit of sabre rattling by ASTI and TUI, getting a mandate for strike action, ballot and all the rest of it. It won't happen. The department have already caved on the issue which was the rock on which junior cert reform, where an individual teacher could be doing an assessment on their own pupil. So that's all sorted out because they're going to cave in there. So I don't think there will be a strike. It's not about money. The Leaving Cert reform, I think, will go ahead. But I have, like I talked to you about, when it goes to the Garda conference, I have people there's a few people in education over the years I really respect. And the shocking thing, I say, give me a one-page memo on what are the issues in primary education right now. And they said the biggest issue is special education. Yeah. Now, just look at some of the statistics here. The number of children requiring a place in a special class, so this is part of mainstream education as opposed to a special delineated school. 15,000 in 2017, 28,000 in 24, and 42,000 projected for 2032. To create a special classroom can vary between 70 grand and 170 grand. So it looks like over the last year, 400 new such classes. And this is a big issue for Micheál Martin. He wants to do this to keep it in the mainstream. And another 400 classes next year. But what I didn't realise was that some of these special needs people, when they get to a certain age, they actually can be very difficult to manage. And that there are actually 1 in 6 pupils exhibit behaviours which has resulted in assaults. there are 200 assaults a year. And actually, so we put in these special classes. There's been no training in terms of dealing with these behaviours. It's been rolled out and there's no therapeutic services for these pupils. In other words, it sounds great. We have special needs. We're integrating them into the system. But I think there is a real kind of open wound developing in our primary education system that this is really resulting in very difficult circumstances for teachers and principals.
So we can understand why many of them are actually talking about burnout.
Yes. And physical threats.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I suppose that comes up, and anytime you try and have a discussion on this, and I deliberately avoided it this week on The Last Word, is mentioning the issue of teacher holidays. Yeah. Because a lot of teachers get really,
it's great for the text
angry.
line. I used to always say, and they're off for another 2 weeks, and they're off for 3 months. It's an absolute scandal. We have the longest holidays in the world, and the text machine would light up. You'd say, you ogre, you nasty person. And, you know, because all the teachers have time.
And how would you be treated when you got home then as a result of that?
Oh, should be water off a duck's back to me. they know that's all in character.
Yeah. So Deirdre didn't take any notice of this
at all.
Okay.
My daughter didn't. I'd like to just let it whistle by their left ear. But the other interesting thing is if you stand back, education costs have risen by 35% over recent years, totally unsustainable. So we have, the good news is, so in 2019 we had 567,000 people in primary education. That was a peak. It's now at about 550,000, but it's going to go down very substantially by 20%, simply because we know the birth rate of this, where it's going to go up in post-primary, and third level is fairly stable around 250,000 a year.
Can I come back to the holidays issue though? Because what I think is that the number of school days that have to be completed is 186 days or something, which is about half the year. And many of the teachers are pointing out, and I fully take what they're saying in relation to this. You know, some people say, and you've had this, I'm sure, when you used to be presenting the radio, look at you, you rock in for work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah. I used to drive people mind breakfast. I only just got in here at 5 to 7 for a 7 till 10. But I was actually in there setting the alarm at 4:10.
Yeah, I mean, and I spend the day preparing, and you're always on in many respects, finding stuff and things.
But you get a lot of material from the podcast, which you can just plagiarise and copy and paste. Anyway, carry on.
yeah. Doing your research for you again is usual life.
That's
but anyway,
true. That's true.
But I suppose the point is that I fully understand that teachers, it's not just what they call the contact hours in class. And I think the Teachers Union of Ireland, this is a secondary school issue. They want to do just 20 hours of contact a week with students, and they want no more than 20 in a class. They say this is the only way to do the job properly. So I was asking, well, what is the actual amount of contact hours at present? It's 21 and a half hours. So we're talking about an hour and a half a week that they want reduced. And they're saying that, you know, outside you have to prepare for the class, and you actually have to then spend hours afterwards correcting essays or correcting various pieces of homework and the rest of it. And I understand that, and they talk about...
Well, there's not a lot of... primary level, there's not a lot of homework.
No, but I'm talking about secondary at this stage.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're talking about all the extra hours about that they have to now... They're constantly having to upgrade their skills. They might have to take in new things in relation to AI and the rest of it. But it did strike me, and again, I stand to be corrected in this, and I must find out more about this, but how much of the time that they get, you know, is the holidays become a time in lieu for doing that, essentially? That if you are off for 2 months or 3 months in the summer, is that, well, actually, people don't get that much holidays in. How much of that time, I mean, how many teachers come back a couple of weeks before the schools returned at the end of August and do their training for the new year or do all their prep work and all the rest of it? I mean, that's what I thought you would expect, isn't it? I mean, maybe they do that. I'm surely they don't just rock in on the first day of the new school year
some of
at
the
the
syllabus,
end of August.
you're teaching the same stuff about Cyprus or whatever it is.
Because it hasn't changed year
exactly.
on year.
It's the same old notes. You're just recycling.
So if there's retraining and all those things to be done, would there not be time set aside in what is known as holidays, or is that too difficult to reform to actually take on with the teachers?
If you're to compare to me the stress that a Garda has, the hours that a nurse has to do, and compare with a teacher, I would just say, like for like, the teachers have it handy. Now, it depends on with
the location.
On holidays, they have it handy. They don't do anything on a Saturday or Sunday, really. Like everyone believes they're put upon, but they look around. You know.
But hasn't it become more difficult? I mean, even in the social media era of trying to police kids with their phones, and
there are non-hour difficulties. Yeah.
And can I also say that? I mean, is it now that we expect too much of teachers, that nearly every new problem is, instead of parents after dealing it for themselves and with their children, they outsource it to the schools. They expect the schools to do everything for them.
Yeah, and let's also say that back in the day, like my mother-in-law had her 97th birthday, when she was teaching, there was 34 in the class, typically in a small rural school. And now the pupil-teacher ratio has gone down from 23 to 19. The fact is that these things are improving, and especially with the reduction in numbers at primary level, this is going to reduce more. Now, the minister announced, this is sort of so typical of the Department of Minister of Education, a national convention on education. It reminds me of Pope Francis, like he did... big deal, a big synod. You know, it's just a talking shop. Please, would you make some decisions? Well, they're not a substitute for anything. But generally speaking, I would say that the thing about our education system is that we've got to look at performance in terms of the 3 R's. Like, I find a lot of young people, when they send a text, they don't spell properly.
Actually, they can use artificial intelligence to do it for them in the future.
Okay, right, okay. Well, put it like facetious. This. That's one of the arguments, actually, in favour of leaving cert reform, because it's so open to AI manipulation. But at the end of the day, there was one other issue that I want to allude to, which is divestment, because this is particularly true. So we have decline of the church, and it draws together what we discussed earlier. So, you know, the bishop being the patron, 90-something, 9 out of 10 schools are still under the Catholic ethos. And I actually think that, so it's not that the Catholic Church want to do this, they want to have a guaranteed place for their thing. Now, for Catholic people to go to Catholic schools, as opposed to controlling the management of the school. Now, for a lot of teachers, it suits them, even though the surveys showed 63% believe religion should be taken out, work for First Holy Communion, confirmation should not be in the classroom, and this came out from the INTO surveys. So what I think is that we need to proceed along the lines of divestment, but not nationalising it through the education training boards, which is one of the models. In other words, that this becomes totally state. I think we should retain a sort of Christian ethos. I think we should retain parental control. And we need to have a new model, clearly, as there won't be priests to be chairpersons of board of management, but this whole divestment issue needs to be thought about and needs to be developed for a secular society, but at the same time retaining tradition. What do you feel about that? Like, yeah, you've 5 kids yourself. I mean, like, they've been through the education system. Where do you stand on a Catholic church like the Church of Ireland schools? The very same. 4% of the church. They want to keep their control. In fact, they are actually the biggest recipient of migrant children.
Well, funny enough, as it happens, right, I still have one, my youngest fella is in 5th year in secondary school, so I still have an interest in relation to this, and he goes to what is very much a Catholic secondary school. All his sisters went to a Church of Ireland secondary school, and all of them in primary school went to a Church of Ireland school, where I ended up on the board of management of a Church of Ireland school, despite the fact that I was
you do a lot of pro
Catholic.
Bono stuff. I'd never made that mistake, but carry on.
Not even during your political career, no?
No.
And it was very interesting to look at, in fact, we at one stage in the school, the population growth amongst various Protestant denominations was such that there was a year where we didn't take a single Catholic in. And it was all done on the basis of Church of Ireland first, or siblings first, Church of Ireland, and then various other denominations. And I remember 1 or 2 discussions breaking out as to whether 1 or 2 of the denominations actually deserved to be included in the Protestant orbit before we started admitting the Catholics. So I'm fully aware of the bishop was involved in the board of management and the rest of it. So I'm aware very much of the desire for cultural maintenance, and I'm just aware of the Catholic Church having the same thing in some places. But the issue of sacraments, communion and confirmation, what was happened in the Church of Ireland school that all my children went to as primary school, they separately went for instruction for communion and for confirmation.
During school hours or out of school?
No, out of school hours.
Okay, right.
And I actually thought...
And it worked well?
I thought that worked very, very well. And I thought that was the best way of doing it.
Yeah. The other big thing to watch out for, and my final word in education, primary education, is the demographics are not only showing less numbers going through the education system, but it's really stark, the urbanisation. There are 1 or 2 rural schools in this country, primary schools, that have more teachers than pupils, right? That is unsustainable. And what you're going to see is unavoidable. The mass rationalisation of really small 1 and 2 teacher schools across the country.
Are you suggesting that it is wrong to have schools where there are more teachers than pupils?
Sorry, of course it's...
Right. So then, and this is where I get
more teachers than pupils.
Sorry, hold on. This is where I get to defend
Give
myself
me a break.
on the thing that you brought up erroneously before the break. So do you think then, might it be wrong for people to be living on their own in 5, 6, 7 and 8 bedroom houses?
Well, put it like this. I don't think you can equate the cost of a primary school teacher to people who have worked hard, paid for their home, and now are being scuffled out by commentators, woke commentators, who have a pseudo concern for young people. The fact of the matter is that, you know, people at the end of their days, like I rattle around in a big house, I'm an empty nester like that, and you know what? The only way they'll get me out of it is in a box. Right. So let me explain myself here. And let me talk now, and I don't want to be misrepresented in relation to I heard it was outrageous what you're doing.
Yeah, of course you did. I'd say no, I'd love to see the text and see was that really what was said in the text. But the point, you just said there, use the same line that Valerie Cox did. This was on the Anton Savage show last Sunday morning, and I went in, and Francis Fitzgerald was on it as well. And we'll talk about Francis Fitzgerald in the subscription edition, if for no other reason... The presidency, the presidency. For no other reason that Frances said to me how much she enjoys the podcast every week, and she's one of these people, I must become a subscriber. So my answer to that, Frances, is if you want to hear what Ivan and myself have to say about your decision not to go for the presidency, it will be in the subscription edition. And I have been sniffing around Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil to find out what's really happening, and I have stuff for stuff for you on that. All right. But the point you were making was your outrageous remarks, whereby almost like the Nazis rounding up the Jews. It sounded like that, apparently. See, you there used a line that Valerie did, about hard-working people who've paid for their houses. Actually, an awful lot of people have inherited their houses. An awful lot of people who claim to be hard-working never did a tap of work in their lives. And, there's sort of like the idea that automatically that you're entitled. Okay, let me just explain it a little bit. We have the biggest houses, or the most under-occupied houses in the European Union. We have more empty bedrooms per head of population than anywhere else. If you were to we could solve our housing crisis in a stroke if we were to move people into empty bedrooms, right? I'm not suggesting that. People want to misrepresent it, they can misrepresent it. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I did say is we have to find incentives to find a way whereby people, by choice, can find somewhere else to live if they decide they don't want to be rattling around in a 3, 4, 5, even 6 bedroom house on their own, if they're a widower and the rest of it. And yes, I fully understand that there are circumstances in which they want maybe their adult children and grandchildren to come back and visit and have somewhere to stay. I understand where they may be, and this is going to be very important with our ageing population, that you may need a spare room, that you might need an overnight nurse to come in and care for you. Fully understand that, all the rest of it. That's an extra room. It doesn't mean you need another extra 3 bedrooms on top of that, which might be the case. And I say this as somebody that when the time comes, I live in a fine big house with Aileen and the kids. Sure, I've seen it on VIP and RSVP magazine. The decor itself, the plushness on the carpet's about 6 inches deep, and we'll put Donald Trump to shame, some of the antiques and the drapes and all that kind of thing. There's no antiques anyway. Anyway, the point being that I'm fully committed to trading down when the time comes. Right, I'm not yet into my 60s, so it's not have come, but I am fully committed not to be rattling around in a big house, and also using the proceeds actually to fund retirement and the rest of it and stuff like that. So I'm not being hypocritical in relation to this. I think that part of the hypocrisy in relation to it is that And sometimes people in settled areas are the ones who object to new apartment blocks being built where they could, as they do in other countries, trade down into, instead of having the four. And it was Dermot Bannon put this in my mind a few years ago. And it was actually one night on The Tonight Show. I don't know whether you were there with me the same night when he started talking about, for example, in Sweden, they deliberately build the apartment blocks from 1-bedroom apartments up to 5 and even 6 bedrooms. And these now, of course, they tend to rent more than buy. But the point is still well made, is that as your family grows, you move apartment within the block. So you stay in the same area, the same community, the rest of it. But when you get to a stage where the children start moving out, you then start moving back down into something more size appropriate. And that is what I'm suggesting, that it should be the case, is that we should encourage people. I'm not forcing anybody to do anything they don't want to, but we should make it more acceptable and financially helpful, and we should be building the apartment blocks for older people so that they free up. It is ridiculous that you have all around Ireland, you have these housing estates, 3-bedroom houses, sometimes extended into 4-bedroom houses around big greens, where 20 or 30 years ago, there would have been all sorts of children out playing, all the rest of it. All those children have moved on, their parents there. It's redundant space because you have 1 or 2 people rattling around in houses that are too big for them. And then you have younger families, 1 or 2 kids, and they're in small, cramped apartments, and they don't have the facilities, and they can't afford to buy these houses as other people. That's the point I was making.
Well, first of all, I get that you're pretty prescriptive about how everyone should live their lives, whether it's woke or whether it's this. I get that. I'm a live and let live, sort of free society type of person. But there's a serious point. First of all, you are right. In Ireland, the average number of rooms divided into the number of people works out a ratio of 2.1 rooms per person. The EU average is 1.6. So there is some justification what you're saying, and 88% of people, or nearly 9 out of 10, over 65, the ratio is even higher. So that is a matter of fact. So this downsizing and right-sizing, however, is such a distraction of a red herring. It reminds me of the Airbnb. Airbnb and downsizing is a get-out-of-jail clause for people who need to focus on infrastructure, housing supply, 50,000 new units a year, whether they're apartments or houses. Everything else is pretty immaterial or marginal. And the fact of the matter is, okay, you can tweak the fair deal scheme. You could maybe give someone a grant of 20 grand to get out of a bigger house. But look, the truth of it is people they've lived their whole life, they live in a particular area, there aren't facilities in it, and particularly in rural Ireland, and they definitely just want to die where they have been born and reared. And I say, you know what, provided you're not a burden on the state, do what you like.
You see, you're making an assumption there which isn't necessarily true. Born of the fact that you have lived your whole life in the same house. Now, I know you've rented places and stuff, but you've always had the home to go back to.
Since 1880, the Yateses are in Blackstone.
Yes, okay, right. No.
And that's a kind of touchstone for me. Like, I'm not going to be talked out of it, you know what I mean, anyway at all.
My point is, you say people live their whole life. Most people don't live their whole life in the same house, right? Most people actually grow up in a certain house and then they leave it and they set up their own home. But what you're actually saying, but most people don't necessarily stay in the first house that they buy.
Yeah.
Right? Okay?
You could have a starter home, you could have a better home. Yeah.
And they move up. And then you're saying because their circumstances changed, so they decide they need a house with more bedrooms because they're having children, or they need to extend that house because they have more children. So they move upwards because of need. So what I'm saying is if the needs change, that's when you start scaling back. You're just saying that you want to keep them in the furthest point up the chain rather than coming back down it.
If mobility at various stages of your first home, you could be a single person getting a studio apartment, you then have a couple of kids, a 2-bedroom apartment, then you move to a 3-bedroom semi-D, and then that's grand. That's what's called freedom of choice. But telling old ones and old fellas like me that we have to downsize is a completely different proposition. And it's outrageous, frankly.
I'm not telling you to. I'm encouraging it by saying you put the structures in place.
No, we
to
heard
help
you.
it.
We heard you. The
You
whole
didn't
country
hear.
heard
You didn't hear. The whole point is you're taking it second hand from somebody else who wasn't listening perhaps as fully as they should have been, although I suspect the text is somewhat different to what you told me it is. We have spoken for way too long here. We have loads of things, though, in the subscription edition, which is available to subscribers in a couple of days. If you go to pattopowerpodcast.com is where you can actually find
Canada,
details.
Australia,
the presidency in Fine
there's
Gael.
quite a lot happening. And some readers, listeners' questions. Yeah.
We've loads to get through in that. So hopefully you can join us for that. From me, Matt Cooper.
And enjoy your own home. From me, Ivan Yates.
Thanks very much for being with us.